Hello and welcome to Americans Learn. My name is Lauren, and today I am going to be looking at side projects again. This one is going to be historical myths, I believe, because of the movies. Last time I looked at things that I know wrong about war because of the movies. Today we're looking at myths that movies have tricked me. So I'm excited to get going with this. I hope you are too. I don't really want to waste any more time, so just make sure you are giving Simon Whistler some love on his side projects, and he's got a bunch of other channels too. You can check them out and let me know what I should react to next. Let's go.
Ah, the silver screen. Not only has it granted fame and glory to generations of Hollywood stars,
but plenty of historical figures as well, from gladiators to samurai. But that does beg the question, just how accurately do the movies portray history? Well, not very, as it turns out, as we're going to find out today.
That is one thing that I will do a lot, though, if I watch a movie that is, like, based on a true story. A lot of the times, like, I'll watch the movie and straight to Wikipedia. Just to, like, all right, well, how accurate is this? A lot of the time, barely. They used some of the correct names. I did hear about this one.
from the epic 1958 drama The Vikings to the 2010 animated fantasy How to Train Your Dragon,
Vikings in cinema usually share the same wardrobe piece, the horned helmet. In fact, it goes beyond film. You can find Vikings with the iconic headgear in comic strips like Hagar the Horrible, and even on the mascot for the Minnesota Vikings NFL.
I feel like, did it start because of opera? I feel like I'm gonna blame opera for this one. I just imagine, like, the opera ladies with the horned helmets.
Team. One problem though, Vikings did not wear those helmets. Of the many examples archaeologists have found, none have horns. Instead, they're rounded metal helmets with unique spectacle guards over the eyes. Even these were apparently rare, and Viking runestone drawings suggest that they primarily wore just simple caps with nose guards. It is possible that ancient Scandinavian people wore helmets with metal horns for certain rituals, but this was long before the seafaring Vikings of the Middle Ages, whose raiding and regular warfare would have made ostentatious decorations like horns impractical and, well, just downright counterproductive. However, the image was enough to inspire German Romanticism in the 19th century. The first person to put horns on a Viking wasn't a filmmaker at all, but rather Carl Emil Doppler, the costume designer for the debut.
Ooh, that's for sure some kind of. That was Odin, because he had his ravens.
Production of Richard Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen at the first Bayreuth Festival in 1876.
Okay, so yeah, I was right. It's opera. Wagner's The Ring Cycle, huh?
Wagner's epic 15-hour opera has become the defining work of the Romantic period's Viking revival, during which writers and artists in Germany, Britain, Scandinavia, and the US produced a myriad of works celebrating Germanic and Nordic culture and mythology. While their efforts did much to promote interest in the Vikings, they also created a few myths that have perpetuated through cinema and other media to the present day. Namely, they gave them the wrong hats. Just before we jump back into today's video, I want to take a moment to tell you about our fantastic sponsor, Sheath Underwear. Sheath makes the most comfortable boxer briefs that you've ever worn. Look, if you're tired of boxers that are too loose, who isn't? Briefs that are too tight, oh my lord. Like, I was a boxers man before, because briefs are just like, what is that? Why is it so tight? Well, Sheath... No, I didn't just take these off. These were tucked behind me. They're clean. Don't worry. Sheath is absolutely the best of both worlds. I'm wearing a pair of Sheath right now, not these ones. And they're a daily thing for me. I bought one pair of Sheath. And I was like, well, I didn't buy it, to be honest. They sent it to me for free because it's a sponsor. Let's be honest, fact boy. And I was like, it was a bit weird that you put your different man parts in these different things. And I put it on and I was like, it's a bit weird. It's a bit weird. After a day, I was like, oh, I get it. Send me more, Sheath. Send me more. And now... my underwear drawer is just Sheath. There's nothing else in there. Maybe a swimming costume. Sheath's stretchy fabric with moisture wicking tech keeps you cool and comfy no matter what you're up to. Plus, they've got those dual pouches that I mentioned to keep everything in place. That, as I said, I was skeptical at first, but it really does work wonders. But if it's not your...
That does look very funny to me, though. Not gonna lie. No idea if this sponsorship is still going on for him, but if it is, check it out. This is still happening, though. Look at these lovely... I can't ever find, like, a good angle for this. But, like, look at that. We have, like, a really fun Americans Learn shot glass. You can buy that. You can buy that for Christmas. Christmas is coming up. We've got a bunch of shot glasses.
Your style, sometimes I'm not feeling it. You just wear them like regular underwear. Fantastic. So here's the deal. Head on over to sheathunderwear.com and check out their new bamboo pairs. Your nether regions will thank you. And for a little extra love, use the promo code SIDEPROJECTS to snag a fantastic 20% discount on your order. That's sheathunderwear.com, promo code SIDEPROJECTS. You won't regret it. And now back to today's episode.
Good. Let's go.
Who can deny being inspired by the romantic depiction of pastoral warrior poets in
Edward Zwick's 2003 blockbuster The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise.
This image has become ingrained in the Western mind when we think of samurai. But how accurate is it? Well, not very. Frankly, the premise of The Last Samurai, that the samurai resisted modernization in the face of westernized businessmen, is essentially the opposite of reality. By and large, the samurai were the businessmen pushing for modernization. In fact, the samurai led a revolution to modernize Japan and restore the emperor to power,
While the emperor depicted in the film was opposing the samurai.
But let's go back. Starting in 1633, the ruling Tokugawa shogunate instituted a foreign policy of total isolation known as sakoku. They relegated the emperor to a mostly symbolic role and governed Japan in a feudal system whereby samurai lords ruled over large estates similar to those of European aristocrats. Since Japan had nearly no interaction with outside nations, these samurai slowly lost their military role and became statesmen and bureaucrats. Then, in 1854, Commodore Matthew C. Perry of the US Navy used a threat of force to open Japan to foreign trade.
It's like, again, every time I see that, I just like flash back to, every time I see that particular picture, I just flash back to the history, a brief history of Japan, I guess, by Bill Wirtz. It's like, open the borders, stop having them be closed. That bit. If you haven't seen A History of Japan, definitely go and watch that after you watch these. Like, it's fun. Oh, again, that lives in my head all the time. That's how you know it was a good video. Anyway, this video.
Seeing how far behind Western powers they were militarily, the Tokugawa shogunate capitulated and signed several treaties with unfavorable terms for Japan. The nation's samurai were not happy, but not because they wanted to keep Japan isolated. Rather, they felt the shogunate was too submissive to the foreigners and that Japan should instead swiftly modernize to stand against Western powers in its own right. An alliance of samurai eventually started the Boshin War in 1868 and used military training and weaponry from France and Britain to depose the shogunate and put the young Emperor Meiji into power. Now, it is true that the Meiji government began to curtail the traditional feudal power and privilege of the samurai class, and a few didn't like this. A small uprising did occur, the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, which inspired the film. However, its leader, Saigo Takamori, was actually one of the samurai who'd originally fought to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate in the Boshin War. He was in reality a staunch proponent of modernization and fought imperial troops with modern guns and artillery. He even wore a French uniform. So, yeah, the modernization of Japan was certainly a tumultuous time, but the romanticization of samurai as conservative swordsmen devoted to tradition, well, that's 100% myth.
Am I shocked that a movie depicting Tom Cruise as the hero of the samurai is, not accurate to history? No. No, I'm not, if you had to guess. Oh, right. This is the one where they actually sounded more Southern, right? Like, if you read a Shakespearean play in a more Southern accent, a lot of the time, or vaguely, it sort of flows a little bit better. The reason if I remember correctly, and we'll see if he tells me this too, the reason that we have this stereotypical, like, British accent, or like the reason the British accent is the way it is today, is because the German king, I think it was George the Third, maybe? Either way, they had this German king who, when he was learning English, had a German accent. So, pasta salt or whatever. Salt. German. Okay, so he'd say to pasta salt. And so the upper class, in order to mimic him, essentially, to like mimic the fancy king accent, started like elongating vowels a little differently. So salt. And that became a British accent. Ignore my terrible accents, by the way. But, like, that's the general gist. The German king learning English when he was finally in England for the first time. Like, the rip upper class trying to mimic them, and then everybody that trickled down.
Now, this one might be a little hard for me to get through. Alright, so we know the Hollywood trope.
Where ancient Greeks, medieval knights, and even hobbits all speak English with the modern British accent known as received pronunciation.
Queen's English or BBC pronunciation, even though neither the actors nor the characters are British. While that's clearly false enough that we'll give them a pass, what we can't excuse is the myth that historically British characters spoke with this same accent. Take the film Shakespeare in Love, for example. Gwyneth Paltrow is from California.
So why is she speaking with a modern British accent when no one in the period of the movie spoke that way?
A hired player no longer.
In fact, their accent was arguably more similar to Gwyneth Paltrow's real accent. At the earliest, received pronunciation dates back to the beginning of the 18th century, well after the period pieces in the Elizabethan era. However, it was not recognizable in its modern form until the late 19th century and didn't become dominant across the UK until the 1950s. A good example of pronunciation differences between this Queen's English and the original pronunciation of Shakespeare's day is the rhotic R. Speakers of received pronunciation basically don't pronounce the R's at the end of words, but many other dialects do. Original English pronunciation did, and since this rhotic R didn't start to disappear until the mid-18th century, that means British colonists in North America pronounced it, which is why Americans still do today. Now, before you Americans start getting too excited, that doesn't mean Shakespeare necessarily spoke like someone from Ohio.
I'm from Ohio, and people always say, well, Ohio people don't have accent.
American English has evolved in other ways, and original pronunciation was its own unique dialect that can still be heard today in specific productions of Shakespeare's plays at the Globe Theatre in London. They're not a perfect match. Audiences most often compare the pronunciation to the modern accent in West countries like Bristol, Cornwall, and Devon. In other words, maybe when Australian actress Cate Blanchett played Queen Elizabeth I, she should have channeled a little less Queen Elizabeth II and a little more Dorset dairy farmer.
Okay, so he didn't go in as far. I've heard, like, certain people say did sound a little bit more like a little bit more like a more recent Southern draw in America. Like, not exactly, obviously. So don't at me about that, because it's not a 1-to-1, but it would have been a little bit more, it would have been a little closer to that from what I recollect. And I know there's a couple of places in England that they adhere to the original pronunciation, and there are some cool videos about it, and it does sound different. And it's not really American, obviously, but like it definitely sounds different than how you consider a stereotypical British accent in this received pronunciation thing. It is interesting, and I do recommend looking stuff up about it, because all of my information is months ago. I was looking at this stuff, and some of it I learned like years ago. And I'm just like, oh yeah, I knew that it wasn't the same, but and then closer to closer to what the American language would have been at the time. I can't words. Words are bad. I'm gonna continue on with the show because I can't speak. Aw, man, bummer.
We all love the scene in Peter Pan where Wendy defiantly chooses the plank over the pen and walks to her doom, only to be saved by the magical protagonist. However, Peter Pan's flight isn't the only fantastic element of this film. While pirates like Captain Hook were historically a reality, the idea that they murdered people by forcing them to walk the plank is almost entirely invented. There are certainly more films and TV shows that feature the execution method than there are in actual recorded instances of it happening in history. The only widespread use of plank walking by a pirate seems to be that of John Durdrake, who reportedly used the method to execute the passengers of ships that he looted in the early 18th century. A couple of caveats though. First, Durdrake, a Dane, operated in the Baltic Sea, attacking mostly Russian and Scandinavian vessels, very different from the tropical pirate archetype. Second, this is all assuming that he actually existed. Much of this tale doesn't add up historically, and many consider him, and all of the plank walking, to just be a legend. In fact, historical documents suggest that the practice was primarily used by other groups instead. The term walking the plank was first documented by scholar Francis Grouse in his Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue. In this, he wrote that it was a method used by mutineers to dispose of their ship's officers without being guilty of murder, since the victims supposedly went over willingly. Slave traders also regularly made use of the plank. In a committee organized by the House of Commons in the late 18th century to discuss abolishing the slave trade, witnesses revealed that it was common for slavers to make their captives walk the plank if they ran out of food for them.
Now, movies have done a lot to perpetrate the myth that pirates made people walk the plank.
But it was likely Robert Louis Stevenson who created this myth in the first place. His 1884 novel Treasure Island mentions it in association with pirates 3 separate times. Moreover, it created much of the other tropes and stereotypes that are associated with pirates in popular culture today, like pet parrots, peg legs, and eye patches. Now, over 100 years later, the Muppets still preserve these tropes on the big screen, whether they're mythical or not.
I heard that, like, when the pirates did use the eye patch, it was literally to, like, so when they went from above deck to below deck, they could still see. So, like, they would have the eye patch on above deck so that, and then, like, their eyes get used to the light. And then if they went below deck where there was very little light, they'd switch it over. And now they have one eye that is accustomed to the dark, you know? And, like, I've heard of things like this working still. Like, I had a teacher who one time apparently spent the entire walk up to the Haunted Mansion in Disney, like, eyes closed, sunglasses, like, dark, in the dark, so that when he went in to the actual mansion and opened his eyes and, like, took everything off, he was like, yeah, it's lit fairly normally in there. Not like bright lights, but it's lit in there. But you can't tell as a person who's walking in because it goes from bright to dark so quick, and then your eyes never quite adjust in the same way as they would if you completely darkened everything before going in. So I don't know. That's what I heard about the pirate eye patch. I don't know if that's true or not because he's telling me that everything's a lie. Oh yeah, this one I did kind of know. At least I think they didn't always. I think sometimes maybe, but it wouldn't have made sense for them to always fight to the death because people had their favorite gladiators. You know, you had the people that you liked the best. It was like a sport. You didn't necessarily always want to kill your people. I think that, like, it was a method of execution sometimes. This is, again, an assumption. He might tell me I'm totally wrong here, but mostly because people add their faves. You don't have your fave if they might die next week.
In Ridley Scott's Gladiator, hero Maximus Decimus Meridius
must fight his way from the African provinces to the Roman Colosseum in one bloody battle after another, slaughtering his brutal opponents and protecting his comrades.
The gladiatorial games were certainly violent, and the film portrayed many aspects of them correctly. However, it largely overemphasized how often they ended in death, largely perpetuating the myth that only one gladiator came out alive, like in similar films like Spartacus and Pompeii. In reality, gladiator battles were not the unconstrained violence that you see on the big screen. While the earliest games during the Republican period may have merely been elaborate human sacrifices of condemned criminals, by the time of the Imperial period in 31 BC, they'd become highly regulated with specific rules and even a referee known as the Summa Rudis. The referees sometimes went so far as to pause fights so that the gladiators could rest and receive a bit of a boxing-style rubdown.
What a nice guy.
Originally, the rules dictated 2 types of fight, one without reprieve and one with. In fights without reprieve, the defeated gladiator was always killed, but Emperor Augustus officially banned these types of fights in the earliest days of the empire. This was an economic decision rather than a humanitarian or a moral one. Gladiators required extensive training, and, as accurately portrayed in films, often had a high social status and fame even if they were legally slaves. They were valuable assets, and constantly killing them drove up their price, one not even the emperor could afford. A gladiator's value only increased under the Pax Romana, ushered in by Augustus. This relative peace meant a shortage in captured slaves, to the point that nearly half of the gladiators were actually volunteers looking for a good paycheck and a glamorous, if violent, lifestyle. By the end of the Pax Romana and Marcus Aurelius' rule, the price for a gladiator had risen to 15,000 sesterces, which is estimated to be around $8,000 today, similar to the fee for a modern boxer. There is even a record of Emperor Tiberius offering famous gladiators 100,000 sesterces to come out of retirement. Considering that the gladiator's trainer, or lanista, was often entitled to compensation 50 times the base fee if his gladiator died, you can see why financial imperatives made fights to the death a rare occurrence that usually required imperial permission. Nevertheless, some gladiatorial games did end in death. Though all fights after Augustus were with reprieve, the defeated gladiator still had to ask for mercy. An official, known as the editor, would grant it or not. Normally, the editor, who was the emperor himself if the games were held in the Colosseum, based his decision on the mood of the crowd. But the crowds were usually in favor of sparing the gladiator's life if it fought honorably.
Good for them.
Altogether, it's estimated that just 1 in 5 defeated gladiators died.
If the crowd and editor
Wow.
did decide the loser wasn't worthy of reprieve, they signalled as much with the polizzi verso gesture, and the winning gladiator had to kill his opponent.
However, while polizzi verso does translate as to turn the thumb, historians doubt it refers to the thumbs down gesture used by Joaquin Phoenix in Gladiator, just one more myth that we owe to Ridley Scott.
Yes. I'd heard that the thumbs down gesture was the reprieve, actually, because it signified sheathing your sword, not putting it into a person. But again, that was something that I feel like I was told in like a theater class in college at some point. So there was a couple of these that I feel like I'd heard. Like I think the thing with the Shakespeare too. That sounds like something that I originally learned in a theater class in college. So I don't know. I don't know if it's true or not, or if I'm just out here perpetuating myths and lies and slander and libel and all of that stuff. So let me know how much I got wrong. And let me know where I can correct myself. So thank you so much for watching. Once again, do not forget to show love to Simon Whistler and his channels. He's got some really cool stuff. And again, don't forget, Christmas is coming up. We have fun little shot glasses for all of our channels. And also me. They are over there. Link is in the description below. Link to the stores in the description box below. As well as links to our other channels. Go check out Chicago Reacts and the Chicanime channel as well. Also, don't forget, I occasionally do some live streaming. I'm getting that started back up again. So, hook up with Chicago Plays to check that out. And also on our Twitch. And that is all of the things. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.